buddy, watch this.
Yeah, just wait. That's not the only card that's about to get executed. We've got some really bad Rastakhan's Rumble cards in this video, and I want to talk about what made them so bad and why they haven't found success yet. Now, obviously, I'm not saying these cards are going to be bad forever necessarily. There might be chances some of them see play, but for now, these cards are the worst of the worst in Rastakhan's Rumble based on their played rate, their deck win rates, and their deck inclusions. So let's take a look at the list. Up first at the number 10 spot, it saddens me to say it, but Hir'eek the Bat is one of the worst 10 cards in Rastakhan's Rumble, and spoiler alert, the only legendary on this list. It turns out an 8-mana 1/1's pretty bad, even if you get 7 of them. It's just too hard to buff Hir'eek to a level where it's a significant enough play to overcome any of the downsides of, having to buff it in the first place. In other words, hand buff style effects are low on tempo. When you play Hir'eek, you might get, 7 5/5s. That's amazing, but it still dies to Twisting Nether. It still gets wiped out by Brawl. Big board clears address this card way too efficiently. And if your entire game plan or deck is built around that and then it just fails when it hits the board, that's not a good thing. And because you have to support it so much, thus far, no deck has been able to make Hir'eek the Bat succeed at a wide level among the Hearthstone community. So for now, Hir'eek just isn't getting played. Up next at the number 9 spot is Overlord's Whip. And this is a card I still think has a chance. To me, the numbers make a little bit of sense. You get 4 attacks out of a 3-mana weapon. You clear up a lot of early minions. The real problem here is the effect. Dealing 1 damage to a minion that you play actually turns out can be pretty bad, although it seems like Warrior might have synergies, or those Acolyte of Pains or Frothing Berserkers or whatever it is. It's just not worth it because there are minions you don't want to be damaged, and damaging your own minions makes them much more susceptible to the board. And it turns out a 2/4 weapon right now in the meta is just not very good. There are better weapons for Warrior. Often a Fiery War Axe just trades better into that magical 3 health slot that so many minions tend to fall into. So at the moment, Overlord's Whip, more downside than upside, an awkward card to use, and that means not seeing any play and actively harms your deck often when you include it. So a pretty bad card. Moving on here, we have the Murloc Tasty Fin, and although I think this artwork is amazing, it turns out a Murloc that's more designed for value or resource advantage just isn't that relevant in a Murloc world that's typically more driven by tempo and aggression. So this one being all about card draw means it just doesn't really fit the Murloc plan. So unless there are some utility Murlocs that you're looking to draw on a specific deck, things like Burlocs, for instance, might be okay with Murloc Tasty Fin. For the most part, most decks just don't have a reason to want to draw Murlocs. So although this might look favorable to some other 4-mana card draw options, because of that specificity, it actually limits the card a lot and means for now, it just doesn't make sense and nobody plays it. Moving on to the number 7 spot here, we have Arena Treasure Chest, another 4-mana card that draws you 2 cards, but this one's bad for a different reason, of course, than the Murloc Tasty Fin. This time around, it's a tempo problem. 0 attack means you're not really impacting the board at all when you play this, and perhaps even worse for this card, at 0 attack, it's hard to trade it in and activate the Death Rattle consistently. So you have to add some other sort of support piece or some way to activate this Death Rattle. So although, getting 2 cards might be a good payoff, there's just not much there until you do it. So that delay, that lack of reliability, the compromises you have to make mean this card's really rather awkward to play and get any reward out of. So for now, Arena Treasure Chest just doesn't line up for any decks. Up next here, we have Stolen Steel. And although this card ranks near the middle of the list, if you look at the raw statistics, there is an argument to be made that this is maybe the worst card on this list for things like played and deck win rate. I did rank these a little bit subjectively. I didn't just try to find some sort of algorithm that ranked them based on HS replay stats. I went in and made some judgment calls here and there. So although this one might really belong in sort of the number 1, 2, or 3 spot, I think it fits a little better here because they do hold out some hope for Stolen Steel. I think discovering weapons from another class can be pretty solid in a thief-style rogue or just when there are crazy good legendary weapons out there. That said, this card is about to get a lot worse in the standard format rotation because tons of legendary weapons are rotating out and weapon quality is probably going to go down on average. And if you've played this and I've tried to make it work, you'll know that very often you just get offered some really garbage weapons. And I think that's the challenge with this card, is that it needs more than just the weapon itself. It needs that thief rogue support to really make sense, or it needs some crazy high roll weapon to make sense. And right now, neither of those are rewarded particularly well when you're trying to build a deck around stolen steel. So it just ends up falling short and feeling bad a vast majority of the time. So until some other pieces come in to prop this up, we're not going to see this card being played at all. It really is pretty bad. So now let's move into the top 5, or as some might say, the bottom 5, the 5 worst cards of the expansion. Starting off with Gurubashi offering a 1-mana 0/2, and all this card does is give you 8 armor. And although you might think, hey, 1 mana for 8 armor, that's pretty good. 8 health for 1 mana, I'll take that. That's better than some other cards we've seen when it comes to healing. Sometimes healing for 8 costs you like 3 mana. So that's got to be great, right, Regis? Well, no. And the reason for that is because Gurubashi offering as a 1-mana minion, you can often do much better things early in the game for 1 mana. So for instance, if you're playing this on turn 1, you might just be better off playing a minion that takes a trade and kills a 2-attack thing that's going to hit you in the face 3 or 4 times, right? You can save health by playing stats on the board and trading into early threats. That's another way to gain life. So Gurubashi offering denies you that opportunity. It's just straight up 8 health with no real commitment to the board or influence to the board. Now, beyond that, this card doesn't work in a pinch. For instance, if you're down to 1 health and your opponent has a board and you're trying to just barely stay alive, you can't play this thing for 8 armor because you don't get healed until the start of your turn, which means you pass the initiative back to your opponent for an entire turn. So you can't really heal immediately. It's a delayed heal. So much worse than other active healing cards. It's not really just an 8 health heal either. All that means is this card is awkward to play early. It's awkward to play late. There's not enough raw value here for control decks, which tend to like cards with healing. So it just doesn't line up in any direction that it needs to support the kind of decks that would want to play it. And therefore, it just doesn't get played. At the number 4 spot here, we have the Dozing Marksman, the 2-mana 0/4. You probably forgot this was a card. It has +4 attack while damaged. So you might say, hey, Regis, that's a 2-mana 4/3, dude. That's sick. That's really good stats. But, of course, the conditionality on this card, the fact that you have to activate its attack, makes it very, very bad and hard to work with. And I know some people are going, oh my god, Overlord's Whip plus Dozing Marksman. It's the synergy we missed. And I can't wait to try that deck, Regis. But the problem there, right, is that's a 3-mana card played often after a 2-mana card. So this is no longer played on curve for those sorts of things. I know there are other things like Cruel Taskmasters and Whirlwinds and cards out there that can activate this sort of thing. But at the end of the day, you're often just better off going for a minion that can instantly get some stats and that you don't have to play alongside other things. Because if you play this out for just 2 mana, right? Your opponent gets to trade into it for free. It's removed at no cost to them, and it just died without ever making any sort of impact. And if you have to wait to play it until later because you have some supporting piece that's going to make it slightly above average as a minion, well, then you're waiting a long time to just get 4/3 onto the board, and that's not good either. So it's a minion that relies on an aggressive, fast tempo playstyle, but needs a lot of mana to actually get to that point, and needs time to get to that point. So it doesn't ever really contribute to that fast play style. At the end of the day, you can't play minions like this unless they're going to have an enormous swing with something like Doomsayer. You know, yes, that's a 2-mana 0-attack minion, but it has enormous potential. This card simply does not. And we've seen a lot of designs like this. If it doesn't have attack, it's really hard to play. Dozing Marksman falls in line perfectly. This card is really, really hard to play. Up next here is the Booty Bay Bookie, another 2-mana minion. This time around, the opposite problem. Good stats for a 2-drop, right? 3/3 is a good default stat line. Takes good trades into 2/3s, for instance. But unfortunately, you have to give your opponent a coin to get those stats. And as we know, mana in Hearthstone is so ridiculously valuable. Giving your opponent a coin is worth way more than a measly +1 health gain, because you could just run Bloodfin Raptor as a 3/2, right? So you're getting 1 health to give up a coin. That is not a trade anybody really ever wants to make. So Booty Bay Bookie is simply not worth it. If this was a Death Rattle and you gave the coin on a bit of a delay, maybe I can make an argument that it's playable. But because you're giving them that coin to actually react to your Booty Bay Bookie, you're not even really gaining a temporary advantage. They're almost immediately countering your advantage with a better advantage. So there's no reason to play Booty Bay Bookie. The downsides are enormous. The upside is minimal, making this a terrible looking card. Moving on to the number 2 spot here, we have the Gurubashi Chicken, a 1 mana 1/1 beast. Overkill, gain +5 attack. It's really hard to overkill with only 1 attack. You can't, right? There are no 0 health minions that you can trade into. So what that means is you have to support this card. And as we've seen with a lot of other cards in this list, anytime it requires some condition to be fulfilled or some support to be offered, that's just so hard to work with. And there are lots of other 1 mana beasts that get you off to a faster start, that do something more advantageous. We see that with cards like Spring Paw, for instance, that something like Gurubashi Chicken's just not worth it. It's also hard to get value out of the +5 attack if the minion's dying every time it takes a trade, and at 1 health, that means it's usually going to die. So you have to buff not only its attack to get the overkill, but you have to buff its health to gain any sort of survivability to utilize the overkill effect. What that means is it requires even more support to work. So outside of some very specific scenarios, Hound Masters or Dire Frenzies, this card's just not worth running. It is good to exist in the Deathstalker Rexar pool. That's important, but that's not relevant when you're talking about a card's worthiness to be included in a deck. And when it comes to that, Gurubashi Chicken falls far short of the mark. This card just isn't good. And then finally at our number 1 spot, should come as no surprise if you watch the intro, but frankly, I don't care about the spoilers. Just deal with it, because Arena Patron was perfect for the intro. It's an arena fighter, right? It makes sense. And in this case, according to the statistics on HS Replay for win rate, inclusion rate in decks, for deck win rate versus played win rate, Arena Patron really ranked at the bottom in multiple categories, and statistically speaking, really did look like the worst card out of all of these. I probably personally would have put it below Arena Chicken or above Arena Chicken, depending on your perspective. But I went with the numbers for the top spot here. Arena Patron really does look like the worst card in Hearthstone, or at least in Rastakhan's Rumble, when you average across all of those different metrics. And the reason for that is, right, unlike a lot of these cards, which are bad but cheap, Arena Patron's bad but expensive, making it even harder to play than other things. So it's the worst, but it's also one of the most expensive of all these bad cards, minus Hir'eek, I know, but Hir'eek has some upside. Arena Patron really doesn't have any upside. It's just 5 mana for a 3/3 that's virtually impossible to activate its overkill because it just sits there, not without any lick of defense at all. Your opponent just completely demolishes the Arena Patron. The overkill never gets to activate, and you played a terribly statted minion and you spent 5 mana doing it. Even when it does activate or has the chance to attack, achieving overkill is difficult on turn 5 or later with 3 attack. A lot of things at that point have much higher health. So you have to set up some preemptive trades or use some other spell to support Arena Patron to get its overkill active. And then even when that overkill works, you're just getting another 3/3 that needs another turn to attack. And you're starting the problem all over again. Every time this card works, it just gives you another headache to solve. So clearly the upside, incredibly minimal. The cost is enormous at 5 mana. This card is just awkward to work with. I mean, if it had Rush, sure, maybe this would be the new Grim Patron, but it doesn't, and it costs so much, which means for now, this does indeed look like the very worst card in Rastakhan's Rumble. And there you go, folks. That wraps up my list. 10 pretty terrible cards. A few I still kind of have a glimmer of hope for. Things like Hir'eek, Overlord's Whip, maybe. Even Stolen Steel, part of me wants to dream. But for the most part, you can see why these cards are so bad. They shouldn't come as anything too surprising. Now, that said, if there's a bad card in Rastakhan's Rumble you think didn't make the list, I want to hear about it. Share it in the comments below. If you think you know the best card in Rastakhan's Rumble, why don't you go ahead and take a guess what my take will be for that very next top 10 list. But until then, guys, I just want to thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.